So let's start off with the first pressure that comes along with sport, which I think is the unwavering pressure to succeed. And I think
Yeah.
that's quite an umbrella term. So, Aniruddh, why don't you sort of take our listeners on a journey in terms of what does it mean in terms of the pressure to succeed? What does that entail? What does that encompass?
Okay. So, I mean, by nature, humans are competitive beings. And I think that's something that's important to acknowledge. I mean, humans constantly, it may not necessarily be in sport that you are competitive, but there is something within people that they constantly want to beat someone else at. And that's my personal view. I think people are genuinely competitive. And once you win once, you want to win again. And if you can't win again, you're going to beat yourself up because you haven't won. Because that taste of winning, that taste of being able to be at the top of the world, be at the top of your sport, it's something that no one else can replicate. It's this rush of adrenaline, this, I assume it's dopamine or serotonin. I don't know the difference. I don't do psychology, but it's, it feels very much like a drug in your head when you do win. And it is like a drug in many ways because all you want to do is win and you become addicted to winning. And this is a trait that's seen amongst the highest of sports players is that they become addicted to wanting to do the best and they become addicted to constantly wanting to strive for more and more. And this ultimately can lead in many ways to a sports player's downfall due to the fact in 2 years' time, when you have become slightly older, when you have become slightly slower, someone younger than you is going to come up into your life and be better than you, and maybe even be better than you were 2 years ago. And so I think one of the most infamous examples of this was Lance Armstrong. And so Lance Armstrong was a cyclist who competed in the Tour de France regularly. And he became so addicted to winning, constantly wanting to win. He went on to win the Tour de France for 7 consecutive times between 1999 and 2005, and everyone thought that this guy was revolutionary. He was the thing. He was the creme de la creme, the bee's knees, the cat's whiskers. He was all three of them combined. But people found out that he was doping, and he was doping purely because he was driven by that constant desire to win. And I think that's something that's really dangerous about sports, genuinely, because people are willing to go to extreme lengths to win. I mean, drug use within sports is extremely high, and the competitive nature of them, people constantly want that edge over someone else, so they'll use performance enhancing drugs. I mean, things like steroids as well. I mean, that is a performance enhancing drug, but has become quite popular, and it becomes popular at a very young age. And when people focus sport on particularly young people, I mean, the other day, Man United saw an 18-year-old play for them in the Champions League final. And I mean, 18 is extremely young. I mean, Arsenal, didn't they have the youngest ever Premier League debut? I forgot
15.
how old, 15 years old. I mean, well, 15 years, you're
It's
15 years old after my
uncomprehendable.
GCSEs
Yeah,
is
it's
incredible.
uncomprehendable.
Exactly.
I just
And
want to add, imagine us, like me and you, we're 17, turning 18 in like 2 to 3 months, right? People our age are performing in front of 60,000 people, and they've also got the mental baggage of dealing with everything we deal with, like just as teenagers growing up. It's crazy. Honestly, it's crazy.
and that constant needingness and that constant thing that you need to be better than someone. And when you start putting pressure on such young people, I think it will turn people to ultimately crack at the end. And it's something that's not good at all. But it's also, I think, where sport needs to find a balance. I mean, should they introduce a minimum age for which a player can enter the Premier League, or should they introduce a minimum age for which people can play sport professionally, depending on what sport they're playing? And I feel as if because there will be lots of cases of performance enhancing drugs in the future when they start focusing their efforts more towards the 15, 16 year olds in the Premier League, it becomes extremely dangerous.
I agree, and I think honestly, we need to have a conversation, like as a community, regards to sport and young people, and understanding that, yeah, fine, you wanna compete to the highest level, and some of you are going to get there, but it's not the be all and end all. The be all and end all of sport is the values, morals, and genuine memories that you gain from it. Because when you look back at your life, you're not going to, and look, it's completely hypothetical. Me again, Aniruddh and I were 17. We don't really know. But a lot of people have said that when they look back at it, the one thing they always focus on are what are the memories that I have. The memories of, Iniesta, for example, playing football in the streets on concrete. You know, Lionel Messi in his little town of Rosario, like just playing football in the streets. It's those things that you really value, not the money. Obviously, the money helps, but not the money, not the professional contracts, not all of the elitism that you gain from, becoming a football star, becoming a cricket star, all the sponsorship deals, the free clothing you get. Yes, that all helps, but it's the memories. It's the memories that you gain from just genuinely having a good time and being in it because you just love that game. You love the game with so much passion. And if we can come as a community and really nurture our young kids to adopt that mindset while also having the hard work ethic, I think genuinely that's where we'll see a more positive mental health sort of like outlook when it comes to sport and the pressures that exude from it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems, as we have mentioned repetitively, is that, and I'm just going to phrase it now slightly differently, is that the sport you initially fall in love with isn't necessarily the same sport that you end up playing when you do seek to play at the sport at its highest levels. Because then it becomes driven by different things. It gets driven by toxic personalities constantly, whether that be stalking you online, messaging you online, harassing your family. I mean, it's extremely horrible
Look
what
at
happened.
Harry Maguire. Look at Harry Maguire. Like it's unfathomable the abuse that he has received. Like there is a difference between criticizing a player and saying that they need to improve and the abuse that he has got. Like some people, like I genuinely worry. Like, fine, you have a passion for the sport, but that does not warrant at all the abuse that you give human beings. Because at the end of the day, that is what they are. They are human beings.
I mean, also the amount of like racist abuse Jadon Sancho, Marcus Rashford, and Bukayo Saka received after the penalty shootout in Euro 2020s. I mean, it
They're
was
kids. They're
crazy.
kids.
I mean,
They're still kids. Like
Bukayo Saka was still a teenager then. I mean, it was it was disgusting, quite frankly. And then yeah, I think that's a really big issue in sport at its highest level, is the issue that you constantly need to win, but also you have to deal with so many different things coming at you in so many different directions. And so I guess that's one of the big issues when you play sport at a high level. But I think I think one of the big issues with sport generally, whether it be at a low level or a high level, is the environment that is created within the locker room.
agreed, and this needs touching upon. Yeah,
I think this is something that this is something that's been raised in lots of schools. I mean, lots of sporting bodies have tried to get involved, but ultimately it needs to be driven by the people themselves, by students, by young people. Essentially, I think they need to take a more bottom up approach to it. I think in some ways, what's happening to people who play sports that are in their 40s and 50s, I think it's very unlikely that they will change as people. But I think for young people, they need to really reflect and take a look at the world in which they want to create, the world in which they want to be a part of. And I think that's something that's really important, because sport, whether you like it or not, it can be a fantastic thing, which it is, which we've discussed in such great depth earlier on the podcast. But now it can also be an extremely toxic thing. I mean, you if you sit in a locker room, you're surrounded. Let's say if you play football, you're surrounded by 10 other boys who just play football
or if you're
and
all
girls.
girls, like we're just using boys as an example because obviously we're boys, but like it works for anyone. Like realistically, it works for
And
anyone.
but I think that's important, because since sport is divided by gender
Yeah,
generally,
yeah, yeah,
unless you're playing mixed doubles or something,
yeah.
uh,
Andy
it
Murray, Serena Williams.
exactly, you create an environment in which you only hear half the story. you won't hear the other half of the story. And that's something that I think is very dangerous. And especially if you're constantly surrounded by that one half of the story, whether when you play football, rugby, cricket, whatever, day in, day out, 3, 4, 5 times a week, it's the only thing you begin to start listening to, because these people are people that you become closest to. Because, like, let's say you're playing rugby, you rely on the person, you rely on your guy in the scrum to literally just push you out, make that whole scrum move, and the trust that you have to have in each other is ridiculous. And so if you are playing it 3, 4, 5 times a week, it then becomes like you build this, I guess, you build this relationship with them which you can't build outside of the sport itself, and then you start to listen to them more because they're the same people that are going to be taking tackles for you. They're the same people that will that when you make a mistake, they're going to pick up your mistake and try and rectify the situation.
But also, the main thing as well is you will start to then initiate that behavior, and other people will listen to you.
Exactly.
That's the
And
vicious cycle that you could get into. Is it again? It could happen, and it has happened. Hence why we're talking about it.
and it is happening. I think
Yeah.
that's the other important thing. And so I feel as if the narrative within sport needs to change, and I think a more bottom up approach needs to be taken. I feel as if whether it be primary schools, year 7, year 8, whatever, I think teachers need to play a strong emphasis that sport is inclusive. Sport is something that everyone should enjoy, and sport, it doesn't matter whether you're good at it or bad at it. You should all be able, and you should all have the right to participate in whatever
Mhm.
sport that your school or outside association is
Yeah.
participating in.
And I completely agree. And I think actually like an interesting way to do it, and I've seen this in basketball a lot, is because there's a lot of conversation now between female athletes from the WNBA and male athletes from the NBA regarding their different experiences in sport. Like I love watching sit down conversations between like retired athletes. I think it's just really interesting to see their knowledge in the game. Like I remember watching a 4-person sit down convo between Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Isaiah Thomas, and Joe Dumas, and these are from two very different eras of basketball. The '90s era was a lot more physical, a lot more toxic than the current era of basketball. But the current era of basketball probably could be said to be less less rough, which is maybe a negative thing. Who knows? But just to listen to them talk about basketball and their journey in basketball, I think it would be really interesting in all sports to see sit down conversations between different genders, different people, different ethnicities, have that diversity of experience to truly understand, oh, you experienced this. I'm in a very similar lane to you, but I experienced this. Okay, cool. Here's a common grounding for that experience. Is there a problem here? There is. Okay, cool. How do we fix that together? How do we present a holistic approach to fixing that together? And I think that's a really interesting technique that we could probably employ. Like I
Yeah.
remember at school, we've had these talks from former either former students or when we were in year 9, 10, we had these sixth forms talk about their experience. And I think it's really important to have people who are close to you, demographically and whatever else terms you want to label it with. But they give you that experience where it's just like, okay, I might be going through a similar thing, or I know people are going through similar things. Let's find a collaborative solution to sort of tackle this problem and get that open, honest dialogue between them. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to go bottom up, we need to understand that kids, they are one, they're impressionable, but two, they're also very vulnerable because they don't know a lot. And that's completely fine. At a young age, you are still learning. And it's about feeding them with the right sources of information and feeding them with the right ideas that we can all agree upon. And therefore, have an open and honest conversation about how to solve this problem. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I think I would like to stress, as much as we're emphasizing that sport needs to be changed, it is in the process of being changed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I feel as if you look at what the Premier League, I mean, I think we only use the Premier League in this example because it's the one closest to home for both of us, and
Yeah.
it's also one of the most is it the most popular league? Yeah.
It's the most popular league, and like it's the most watched outside of the World Cup.
Yeah, so we're talking about the Premier League because of its. But if you look at it, 40 years ago, it's completely different. The attitude to the game is completely changed. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, the players have become slightly less competitive with themselves. I think the sport itself has become more competitive. I mean, in the sense that there's no space anymore in the game. You can't. It's very unlikely you're going to see people trying to take shots from 35 yards out regularly. But so I think the game in many ways has become more competitive. It's become more quick paced. It's become more about the team rather than individuals. But 35 years ago, you used to see players like Roy Keane who
Mhm.
used to absolutely,
Graham Souness.
yeah, Graham Souness, who used to basically take the game to the next level. I mean, that was something that was done in the times. I mean, they can't really do anything about it now because that's how they all played, really. Um, but I guess it's become less toxic as the years have gone on, and I think that's something to show that the
Yeah.
sport is improving and sport is improving in general, and people are being more included. I mean, you see more people of different backgrounds join the sport, and you see more people of different sexual orientations joining the sport. And I think it's really important that that continues and that conversation continues about how to change sport will be good. Sorry, I phrased that completely
How
horribly.
changing sport will have a positive impact. No, definitely. And I think
Exactly.
I think that's a nice place to leave it, because inherently sport is a great mechanism for everyone to get involved and learn morals and values that they can apply to their life. No doubt about it. There are hindrances to it which have been influenced by a lot of us, you know, and I'm speaking that in the general sense. But there are ways, and I think there are currently being operated and methods to mitigate those issues. And I think it's really important to stress that we're not all negative doom and gloom. That change is being done, but it's on us, especially as young people, to drive that, because at the end of the day, it's our generation and probably the generations above us, a few above us. It's this crop of talent and this crop of people who want to make sport the best it can be, and make it that overall tool for everyone to have a good time. And as I said earlier, get those memories which, when they look back at their life, will look at it with such fondness.